Hey, Shalom. First and foremost, I'd like to give all praises, all glory, all honor to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rachak, Wadash. Double honors to the elder apostles and elder bishops, a great millstone who taught me this truth, and rule well, peace and salutations to the hopeful elect that is scattered across the four corners of the earth. I was talking with a couple, Christians, quote unquote Christians, just speaking through the word and speaking about, being better as a person. And we were going into different stories throughout the Bible, and one of the stories mentioned was we first talked about drinking, and I was telling them, like, there's nothing wrong with drinking. You can sip on your yun, which is wine, or you can sip on strong drink, but it's only when it becomes not expedient for you that it becomes bad. It only, like, when you do too much of it and you start acting out, or temptation starts to creep in, that's you gotta have a balance. That you gotta know when you're doing too much or when you have to put it down. You know what I mean? So, and that's where I tapped into the whole be sober-minded and vigilant, because you can somewhat be, a little tipsy but still be sober-minded. You see, because you still got your head on the swivel, right? But it's only when you completely lost track of everything that it becomes a problem, and you allow Satan to come in. And I had brought up, look at Noah. Noah, imagine all, like, just if you really think about it, all the things that he went through. I mean, the whole entire earth and the population drowned, and it was just him, his wife, and his 3 sons and their wives. That's all that was left on the planet Earth. And how, he, once everything was settled, he became drunk, and he passed out naked. And when you think about it, to go through a situation like that, yeah, of course, like, you're gonna be like, damn, you're gonna sip on some yun, you know what I mean, and just be drinking, because it's like you just went through all that. You prophesied for, what was it? He prophesied for about, like, 120 years or so. You know what I mean? Spent that whole time building the ark, and then and have to go through the actual flood, and all them people that was drowning and trying to get on the boat, and it was a heavy time. So it makes sense, like, when it's all said and done, like, you want to take a drink, and we already in the world, we get off work and we get a drink, because it's like you wake up early on an alarm clock, and you wait in traffic, you work for Esau Edom, the so-called white man, and all this bullshit, and we get off work, and of course you want to take a sip. So imagine Noah, and that was one of the points that I brought out. And one of the quote unquote Christians mentioned how his 2 daughters, like, got him drunk and had sex with him, and I told him, oh, you're talking about Lot, because that's what happened with Lot. And he was saying, like, yeah, it's a lot of, like, sexual immorality in the Bible and stuff like that, and I didn't really expound on that, but I wanted to expound on it here in this video, because it wasn't like a sexual immoral thing. Like, it wasn't, it wasn't like a sexual immorality. It wasn't like fornication, or it wasn't anything wicked in that sense, because going into the story of Lot, the Lord rained hellfire on Sodom and Gomorrah, and I'm gonna go ahead and read that part, and then I'll get to the point. So this is in Genesis 19 when this account happens, and I'll start at verse 23. The sun was risen up upon the earth when Lot entered into Zoar. Verse 24, then the Lord Yahweh rained upon Sodom and upon Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord Yahweh out of heaven. You see, verse 25, and he overthrew those cities and all the plain and all the inhabitants of the cities and that which grew upon the ground. All right, verse 26, but his wife looked back from behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. And that goes into another topic, because she was looking back at all that treasure, all the resources and wealth that she had back there stored up through Lot, via Lot. And because she didn't let that go, she had to pay the consequences. And you can read about that in Matthew's, in the gospel, when Yahushua said, remember Lot's wife, because it's going to come a time where we can't look back at what we left in this world. All of it is going to be destroyed, because what is here on earth, we can't take with us in the afterlife. You know what I mean? So us being men of the Lord, we're trying to store up treasures in heaven. We're not trying to store up treasures here on earth. And if we do have treasures here on earth, we don't give a damn about these treasures. You know what I mean? Because it's all going to go away, you see? And that goes into another topic, but continuing on, Genesis 19:28. And he looked toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the plain, and beheld, and lo, the smoke of the country went up as the smoke of a furnace. All right, verse 29, and it came to pass, when the Most High destroyed the cities of the plain, that the Most High remembered Abraham, and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow, when he overthrew the cities in which Lot dwelt. All right, and here's the point right here. This is the point, because at this point, you got to imagine, we're talking about cities. Now, we're not talking about, like you go to a park and you see just that park, that area, that amount of square footage. You're talking about an entire city. You see, I'm here in Dallas. So Dallas is kind of combined with Fort Worth. It's a DFW. And that's, that alone is what, like 30 miles from downtown Dallas to downtown Fort Worth. I believe it's like a 30-mile stretch. It could be more, but nevertheless, it's a lot of land. It's a big space. So the fact that Sodom and Gomorrah and the neighboring cities were destroyed, when Lot was seeing these things happen, even his daughters, you're thinking the entire world is ending, because the imagery of that is, we can't really understand. The fire and brimstone from the heavens destroying these entire cities, you see, and killing everybody, and everything just being burnt, in fire. And, I'm sure the earth, the ground was shaking, and that's something that when you see, you get shook up. You know what I mean? Because it's something that's terrifying. All right. And here's the point. Genesis 19:30, and Lot went up out of Zoar and dwelt in the mountain, and his 2 daughters with them, for he feared to dwell in Zoar, and he dwelt in a cave. All right, he and his 2 daughters. Verse 31, and the firstborn said unto the younger, our father is old, and there is not a man in the earth to come in unto us after the manner of all the earth. I'm going to read that in the NLT. It says, one day the older daughter said to her sister, there are no men left anywhere in this entire area, so we can't get married like everyone else, and our father will soon be too old to have children. So in their minds, they're thinking they're doing this so that they can preserve the seed of their father, so that they can have children, and there can still be men dwelling on the earth in that area, because they were afraid that their father was going to be too old to bear children. And with all that just happened, there was not a single man in that area for them to be married unto, and for them to come into them, and for them to have children. So the fact that it was something that he brought up, like sexual immorality, kind of going towards that lane, it wasn't done because they were being wicked and they were being, like quote unquote horny or anything like that. It was because they just seen these cities being destroyed, and they want to preserve. They want to still bear children, right? And they couldn't do that because everybody was dead. Everybody burned in that fire. You see what I'm saying? And then it says, verse 32, come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him, that we may preserve seed of our father. So they did all this just so that they can preserve the seed, and they can that seed can continue on, right? Through having a son or sons, because it was her and her sister. So this is something that they don't really understand. They kind of see it like, oh, this is a nasty thing. Why would they do that? But you got to understand the big picture of what took place and why they made that decision to do what they did. And it is wrong. It's against the law to have children, with your father or your daughters. But you got to understand, the Most High is the Most High, and He can do whatever He pleases, and He has a purpose for everything, and His ways, His thoughts are not our thoughts, and they're not our ways. So the Lord, He created the scenario in order for this to happen. Okay. And also to trip Christians up, to trip people up, because they read this and they're like, ugh, like why did that happen? And then they start to look at the Bible a certain way, and they don't have that true understanding, you know. And then I'll continue on, or actually I'll read Genesis 19:32 in the NLT. Come, let's get him drunk with wine, and then we will have sex with him. That way we will preserve our family line through our father. So they weren't doing it just to do it. They were doing it for a reason, to preserve that line, and that they may have children, so that their seed, their line, can continue on. Because again, they just saw these cities get demolished from fire and brimstone coming from heaven. Like that, that's a sight to see in itself. And then on top of that, their mother, looked back, and she got turned into a pillar of salt. It was just a very chaotic scenario, a very chaotic scene, and a chaotic thing that they escaped from, So it wasn't like a sexually immoral thing. It wasn't, out of wickedness. It was all just to preserve their seed, because they thought there was no men left in that area. They just saw these cities get destroyed. You see what I'm saying? And that's a scary thing, man, to see the Almighty Yahweh rain, judgment on cities, on thousands of people. That's a terrifying thing. I mean, even talking about, September 11, like, that shook the world. That shook America. And you know what I mean? And that was just in the city. You know what I mean? Within like 20 block radius or so. We're talking about entire cities. You see? So it was in their heart to do that, just to preserve their seed. So it wasn't out of wickedness. It was a purpose behind it. But people don't understand. They get offended by how the Lord works in certain ways, just because it's not how they would do it, or it's because they see it wrong. But at the end of the day, man, people don't know shit, like, no one is right. We're all liars. We've all fallen short of the glory of God. We're nothing but just clay. And the Most High is the Most High for a reason, Yahweh. Okay. So I just wanted to share that, get a little understanding on just that particular account. Because I remember before I came into this truth, I was studying the Bible, and my sister was into the Bible as well, and that was one of the things that, when we kind of came across, she didn't understand, and she kind of had this disgusting look on her face, and I didn't understand it either, but I just didn't understand, because I didn't understand it. I wasn't thinking any type of way about it. It's just the Lord didn't open that understanding to me. But the Lord has opened up the understanding, especially through the elder apostles and the bishops and the men on down, and via the Ruach HaKodesh, that opens these understandings of the scriptures, on a whole different level, on a truthful level. So I just wanted to bring that out, that little account out. Adonai Ratazah, Lord willing, you were edified. Once again, I want to give all praises, all glory, all honor to Yahweh, Bahashim Yahushai, Bahashim Ruach HaKodesh. Double honors to the elder apostles, elder bishops, a great millstone, who taught me the truth and rule well. Peace and salutations to the hopeful elect scattered across the four corners of the earth. Shalom.